was a torrent of unleashed energy, the worst of which
Watch it, see you later.
in 10 minutes.
There you go.
1980?
Same time of day.
It's been over a
You were
decade
born on the eruption?
since that day of fury in 1980,
Wow.
when the Pacific Northwest was paralyzed. When nature was unleashed here, there was precious little that man could do. Behind me stands the very crater that was ripped open by that staggering eruption. It's a gaping scar, 1 mile wide, half a mile deep. The surrounding landscape is a numbing affidavit of bare rocks, gray ash, and flattened trees. Today, the mountain is in ruin, in transition, engaged in the slow, arduous process of rebuilding itself. Mount St. Helens is the story of tremendous beauty, sudden terror, and human vulnerability. The indomitable spirit of man confronting the awesome power of nature. What did Mount St. Helens teach us? Are we better prepared to face similar events in the future? What are the stories the survivors have to tell? And finally, has Mount St. Helens ushered us into a new age of catastrophic volcanic activity? We'll explore those and other important questions as we remember Mount St. Helens and rediscover the fire below us.
I want to blow them out next door.
Excuse me, Hannah. Can you move over, Hannah? No? I can't see.
For Jim Szymanski, the awakening of Mount St. Helens was more than just a spectacle on the evening news. More than just tales to one day relate to
Is
grandchildren.
that loud enough?
For him,
Yes.
it was personal. A day of horrors when Szymanski and his 3 fellow loggers welcomed death.
Hannah,
In
is there any way you can move over
Szymanski
just a
was
little
part
bit?
of a 4-man logging team, thinning trees in the Green Mountain,
To the left.
12 miles northwest of Mount St.
Thank you.
Helens.
To the left.
There were Russian immigrants, Evlanty Sharapov and Leonty Skorodov, Hispanic Jose Diaz, and 36-year-old Szymanski, the only English-speaking member of the crew.
I really can't see.
They had signed on in April to cut a 40-acre tract, removing the younger, weak trees. On Sunday, May 18th, they were finishing up the last 3 acres.
And it was a beautiful morning. It was gorgeous out. There was no wind. It was bright and sunny, and everybody felt great because we didn't have too much left to go before we could finish it up.
Valerie Pearson was also out that Sunday morning, part of a 12-member Forest Service crew. They were planting trees on a ridge just 3 miles south of the summit in the Clearwater area.
We'd gotten out there about 7:30 in the morning. It was a beautiful, calm, clear morning. Just a fantastic view of Mount St. Helens. Just almost reach out and touch it. And we worked for approximately an hour.
That fateful morning, Roald Reeton was fishing 23 miles downstream from the mountain with his friend Venus Durgan.
He's trying to beat
I'd
it.
gone to a place that I'd always gone to fish on the South Fork Mattoon River. Steelhead fishing. It was a little early in the season for it, but it was a really nice, beautiful weekend.
About 15 miles northeast of the volcano, amateur photographer Vern Hodgson caught sight of the mountain from a forest road.
As we came down the road, we saw the mountains with the trees, and this friend of mine said, "Oh, look, we can see the mountain, let's take a picture."
At just 20 years old, cinematographer Michael Lina was drawn to the drama that was slowly unfolding at Mount St. Helens. For Lina, the awakening of the mountain was his potential big break.
I saw an article that mentioned the seismic activity around Mount St. Helens and that it might lead to something volcanic. And if that was the case, I want to be there with my camera when that happened.
The siren song of Mount St. Helens began on March 20th. It shook itself awake with a 4.1 earthquake. For the next 29 days, the mountain continued to shake with hundreds of tremors. occupancy peaked on March 25th with 22 significant earthquakes in one 8-hour period.
That means magma is moving
In response to the
underground.
increasing threat, the Forest Service began evacuating personnel, established the first closure zones, and warned residents near the mountain of the danger of earthquake-induced avalanches. Then, on March 27th, an eruption of steam and ash opened a new crater on the mountaintop, and Washington's backyard volcano made its news debut.
We are directly over Mount St. Helens right now. We are at the 10,000-foot level, and there is no question at all that the volcanic activity has begun. You can see smoke and ash pouring from the top of the mountain, especially on the north side of the mountain.
A few days later, a second, larger crater formed next to the first.
There were people that didn't believe the thing was going to blow up. If it did, it wasn't going to hurt anybody anyhow, so what difference did it make?
Others who thought, oh, well, it'll never happen, it can't happen, and it won't happen in the magnitude that they're talking about. So I think you had two groups, one who was very suspicious of something happening, and even to the point of being scared, others who were nonchalant about it.
For many, the novelty of a gently puffing volcano in the neighborhood was a welcome curiosity. Even the governor said that she had hoped to see an erupting volcano in her lifetime. Then, the dreadful discovery. The north side of St. Helens had been deforming, creating a 200-foot-high bulge that was growing at the incredible rate of over 5 feet a day.
I would say this is a very, very impressive sign that something is going on, that it is heating up. But right now, there's a very great hazard due to the fact that the glacier is breaking up on this side of the volcano, on the north side, and that could produce a very large avalanche hazard. This is not a good spot to be standing.
By April 3rd, the bulge had swelled outward some 320 feet, displacing tons of volcanic material. Even with the last explosive eruption in the Western Cascades, only 65 years earlier at Mount Lassen in Northern California, officials were seemingly unwilling to face the possibility of a catastrophic eruption on the north side.
You have to realize that Mount St. Helens had never had an eruption in its history like it that actually occurred on May 18th, so they could only base their predictions on what had happened. They really couldn't tell the type of eruption it would be.
There were scientists, a couple of people, I think, that suspected that it might blow. But I don't know why they wouldn't. When a hayshaker like me certainly thought that something was going to happen. How could it possibly have that much pressure and the thing be sliding and bulging and so on? There's got to be a release somewhere for that kind of pressure.
A state of emergency was declared by Governor Ray on April 3rd. Washington State was faced with the challenge of establishing hazard zone boundaries for an unprecedented event. On April 30th, the state established the red zone, an area of high danger, and a blue zone, an area of high alert. Although these boundaries were generally thought to be 10 and 20-mile safety zones around the mountain. In truth, the northwestern boundary of the red zone cut in only 3 miles from the summit, directly in sight of the growing bulge. This zoning allowed logging operations to continue uninterrupted. Scores of sightseers followed loggers into the same area, assuming they were safe. Elsewhere around the mountain, once these emergency alert zones were established, the battle of the barricades began. Despite the precautions and warnings, the closure only hardened a growing public opposition.
Well, I think it was particularly frustrating for the troopers that were assigned to those areas because they too recognized there were certain dangers and they're trying to do their job and the public wasn't cooperating or didn't recognize it.
There was certainly people who did not like the permit system that probably hadn't visited their cabin in the mountains for several months. All of a sudden they wanted to visit their cabin, and that's what we were trying to prevent.
One resident who refused to leave, even temporarily,
anyway.
proprietor of Mount St. Helens Lodge on the west shores of Spirit Lake. Harry had been there since 1938. His salty stubbornness turned him into a national celebrity.
There isn't enough material. There's not enough material to come down here to affect Spirit Lake. Into the river, no way in the world. Let it rumble.
When I drove in, talked to
Let it rumble.
Why don't you come on out for a few days, a couple of weeks? People are worried about you.
No relation to the president, Harry.
Sheriff, he said, I've lived up here for 50 years. And he said, this mountain's part of me and I'm part of it. And if anything happens to the mountain, it might as well happen to me. But he didn't think that he would get hurt. He really didn't.
Hell, I said, I got nothing to worry about. Well, if anything happened to Mount St. Helens, they'd have me off in 5 minutes.
What? He got buried under about 300 feet.
The area soon became crowded with the curious.
Kind of
Soon had a
ridiculous.
fascination for the unfolding drama. For many, it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to directly observe a volcanic eruption. This convergence led to problems.
You get local citizens who would call and say, get all these tourists off this road. If the volcano erupts or the mountain erupts, we want to be able to get out.
We had a tough time with people the day before the mountain area. You can't close this road. I've got property up there. That's none of you. You can't keep me from going up there. I'm going to sue you.
And so you deal with that problem. And 2 minutes later, you get another phone call from somebody who owned a grocery store in one of these outlying communities who said, hey, you put a roadblock up there, you sealed off my business, and you're bankrupting me.
The imposition of a regulatory wall between people and their possessions brought on hard feelings, disbelief, and eventually political pressure. The growing resentment finally convinced Governor Ray to allow a limited number of people to go into the red zone and retrieve their belongings. On Saturday morning, May 17th, a convoy of about 50 carloads of property owners re-entered the restricted area, escorted by state troopers and sheriff's deputies. The agreement was they had to be out by 6 p.m.
Personally, I didn't feel that it was a good judgment call to take people into the mountain. There was something going to happen, and we just didn't know when or to what degree. So I didn't approve of it then, and I am not going to change my mind 10 years later.
When you think about that now in retrospect, you're just talking about hours when a lot of people could have been killed. And I don't think we should have probably been doing that as we look at it today.
If we'd have kept more of the public farther back from the mountain and also weighed the possibility of closing more of Cowlitz County through the state process, there would have been fewer people close to that mountain on the morning of the 18th.
6:15, Saturday night. Sheriff's deputies escorted the last family out of the red zone.
If we've learned anything from Mount St. Helens, it's a respect for how swiftly and powerfully volcanoes can strike. On May 18th, there was geologic theater here. The Pacific Northwest was caught by surprise, blindsided by something beyond comprehension, like the unnamed terrors of our childhood dreams. For those near Mount St. Helens that morning, there would be no waking from the nightmare.
Sorry about all the biblical references. Literary references to gloom and doom.
Sunday morning, May 18th. Jim Skamanki and his co-workers were almost finished thinning their last stand of trees 9 miles outside the red zone. They would be headed home soon to enjoy a warm spring day with their family.
We're dropping trees to the landfill trailers, and I heard this screaming. Immediately, I turned off my saw, and I looked at the guy on my left, and I thought he'd been cut. And then he turned off the saw, and he said, "No, there's nothing wrong over here." So I looked at the guy on my right, and then we saw Jose. He was running down from the top road, running through the woods, and he was screaming in Spanish that the volcano would explode.
It's like dumb people that don't watch them.
Noise coming through the trees. And it sounded like, the only way I can describe it is like freight trains coming through the woods. They got louder and louder and louder. And then you could feel things shooting out from between the trees toward us. And it was turning black inside the woods. We turned around, threw our saws, and started laying down. And I probably didn't make it any more than 15 feet. And I was going black, hot, massive, whatever it was, ash, gas, heat. And I could feel myself behind me. And I could hear the trees being ripped in half and thrown around. I was angry. I was mad. I thought that was the end of my life.
What Jose Diaz and dozens of others witnessed was a near indescribable display of nature's fury unleashed. At 8:32 a.m., the swelling bulge on the mountain was suddenly jarred loose by a 5.1 earthquake. 15 seconds after the earthquake, 2/3 of a cubic mile of rock and glacial ice avalanched down the north face of the mountain at a speed of 150 to 180 miles an hour. This huge landslide rushed 6 miles to Spirit Lake, displacing its water, causing great waves to sweep 400 feet up the opposite shore.
That's where Harry Truman is.
The slide,
What is that?
driven hundreds of miles per hour by exploding steam, overtopped a 1,200-foot-high ridge, and then ricocheted westward, flowing down the Toutle River for another 11 miles. The avalanche divided into several lobes that filled the valley with a mile-wide hummocky deposit up to 600 feet thick, damming the west end of Spirit Lake. This violent torrent was the largest landslide recorded in history. Once the avalanche began, it opened the north side of the mountain like a giant gate, exposing the magma inside the cone. When the pressure cap was gone, water beneath it flashed into steam, expanding 1,000 times to create a pyroclastic surge that traveled northward at a velocity approaching the speed of sound. Heated to between 400 and 620 degrees Fahrenheit, this lateral blast overtook and passed the avalanche within seconds. The sound of the explosion was heard in British Columbia, 300 miles away, but shot silently over the heads of those at ground level. Unannounced, the lateral blast raced northward over the landscape, collapsing the forest like matchsticks. Like a giant sandblaster, it pulverized tens of thousands of trees and scoured the ground to bedrock. Blocks of glaciers were hurled 6 miles. The blast left a broad apron of devastation over 30,000 feet wide, extending up to 19 miles from the volcano. Meanwhile, water from Spirit Lake poured down the Toutle River, knocking over trees and creating a logjam ready to break and release its terrific force on everything in its path. Far downstream, Rold and Venus were still unaware of the juggernaut rushing towards them.
When we looked upriver, it flowed in a big S-curve where we were at. And upriver, there was train trestles just coming downriver, holding back all the logs from Camp Baker. And it was flowing right towards us. And probably 60 to 70 yards in front of us, it just broke in half. And just all these logs
mud flow. So that stuff you see there is 200 degrees.
16 million cubic yards of water and boiling mud thundered down the mountain.
How you spell
enough
it?
to bury all of Seattle to the height of the Space Needle.
L-A-H-A-R.
In just minutes, 70% of Mount St. Helens snowpack had been swept away and turned into raging cataracts.
What you see is tree.
The avalanche extended 14 miles from the volcano, burying valleys with up to 600 feet of debris.
That's the Lahar?
That's the Lahar. Boiling hot. Look at that tree. Catching fire. What?
It didn't move.
No, that one didn't get knocked down. Look at that. That's real footage. Wow.
Houses 40 miles away from the volcano were covered in mud up to their roofs. In all, over 200 homes were damaged or destroyed.
Trucks?
Trucks, logging trucks.
Sediment from the mud flow also choked 10 miles of the Columbia River, 75 miles away, stranding 47 ships as the water depth dropped from 40 to just 9 feet deep. Glowing pyroclastic flows of gas, ash, and rock fragments, moving 90 miles an hour, scoured the mountain slope between the crater and Spirit Lake.
Talk about those next
The flows, ranging in temperatures from 600 to 1,350 degrees Fahrenheit, continued intermittently for 5 hours. Once the central vent was open, a titanic column of suffocating ash and rock burst through the open surface. A large cauliflower cloud boiled up nearly 80,000 feet into the stratosphere.
I started to run and stopped again and turned around and was totally amazed at the view I saw. The mountain was totally encompassed in ash. You could no longer see it. It was black as night, and it looked like it was coming straight for us. And I thought, well, if I'm going to die, I'm not going to run. I'm going to stand here and watch it come because it's just a view of a lifetime.
Yeah, this lady's stupid.
Electrostatic fields catalyzed electrical storms, punctuated by vivid flashes of crackling lightning bolts. The apocalyptic plume formed an inky shroud stretching hundreds of miles east, turning day to night.
Boiling hot.
Visibility was right down to zero. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. The ash got very thick and it was real difficult to breathe. I mean, it was to the point that you would take in a breath of air and you would have a mouthful of dirt. And I thought, well, I'll die here being buried in ash. I'll be here under 50 feet of ash.
Both Pearson and Hodgson narrowly escaped the main force of the blast and spent several hours creeping down treacherous mountain roads in the sudden darkness as the eruption continued throughout the day. The energy released was equivalent to detonating one Hiroshima-sized bomb once every second for 7.5 hours, or 27,000 times. As the news media broadcast the first reports of the Mount St. Helens eruption, cinematographer Michael Lenow was ready and waiting.
I was given the opportunity to be part of a film crew that was doing a motion picture on Mount St. Helens. And my first assignment was to fly into eastern Washington and shoot all the ash fallout that was known to be happening there. I had no idea what I was getting into, but on the way flying over there, we were flying over the beautiful green forest, Washington State, and all of a sudden we were slammed into this big black blizzard of a black cloud that was carrying all this volcanic ash with it.
A mantle of ash covered parts of 4 states like a dirty gray snowfall. In 2 hours, the ash cloud enveloped Yakima, Washington, 90 miles away, nearly paralyzing the community. It stranded hundreds of travelers at Ritzville, 200 miles away, where gritty ash fell to a depth of 6 inches.
That's
There was total darkness at Pullman, Washington, 234 miles away. It reached Spokane at 2 in the afternoon, 300 miles away, and West Yellowstone shortly after 10 that night. 500 million tons of ash fell over North America in 3 days. The ash was sucked into car engines, clogging air and fuel lines. Air traffic was halted. Thousands of travelers stranded. In 15 days, the ash cloud would circle the Earth, returning to the scene of its fiery origin.
15 days.
What happened here reminds us of the uncontrollable force of nature. The eruption began as a large earthquake, which triggered a massive landslide that culminated in a violent lateral explosion, followed by hours of pyroclastic surges and mud flows, and a billowing, churning cloud
This is the
of pulverized
landslide
stone.
that came out.
In only a few minutes, St. Helens had devastated 230 square miles, transforming lush evergreen forests into a gray, lifeless wasteland. The event gave birth to a sudden and catastrophic change in the natural environment. An environment that people had known and trusted for a lifetime. People like Harry Truman, his Spirit Lake Lodge now buried under approximately 300 feet of volcanic debris, leaving Spirit Lake today a ghostly shadow of its former beauty.
Sorry about that.
And I really can't see.
About, I'd say 45 minutes or
You're ruining the shot for me.
before you can even make
This
out
guy's story
shadows.
is just unbelievable.
Those are the guys with the saws?
The loggers.
And you can make out shadows of trees, and you can see just the few left standing were just kind of looming in this thick gray ash that was coming down.
He's the only one.
Who's that, Jose?
No.
If I walked down
The other
the
three
other
died.
people down below me about 20, 25 feet.
He was kind of selfish.
And burned, they were in pain. And everybody was in such pain they could hardly move. Well, the only thing we could think of at that moment was trying to dig our way back up to where the pickup truck used to be. We were climbing over logs and through the ash and underneath logs and way around the end of broken stumps and splintered trees, and you name it, it was down on the ground. Everything we knew was gone. It was like being put on a different planet. So we made it back to the truck, and where it used to be parked in the middle of the
I think
road
it needs a paint job.
was now down off to the side, and the glass
go to
was
the
all
car
blown
wash.
out of it. The back to the canopy hatch was twisted and contorted. We couldn't even open it. We managed to get the doors open. They were mangled too. And all 4 of us got in the front cab. We sat there for about 10 minutes in pain, afraid to almost touch each other because it hurt too bad. And then it turned black again.
For Venus Durkin, the fight for survival in a roaring flash flood appeared to be lost. Churning logs wrenched her from Rold's grasp and sucked her under the surface a third time.
He was giving up. He didn't give up on it.
The logs moved, and then I saw her hair again. It was just like right there.
Imagine surviving it.
How did they fall?
It was probably another couple minutes, and started to slow down, and all the logs kind of like spread out because it was a clear campground there. And we just made our way from log to log to the end, and fought our way to high ground.
Imagine being stuck in that.
All I wanted to do was just get out of there.
was no plan for air search and rescue before the eruption. No central command center. No single radio frequency for helicopter communications. Rescue operations were worked out by people on the spot, and the confused search for survivors got underway. At 10 a.m., there were still some military helicopters sitting at the Kelso airport. In spite of the continuing danger, Army Reserve pilot Jess Hagerman volunteered to search the smoldering blast zone.
I said, Colonel Watling, you know, it's easy to say that nobody's alive, but somebody could have been in a cave or behind a hill, or, you know, there could be somebody up in that area. He said, you've got 4 Hueys here, do what you think would be helpful. Visibility, you couldn't see the mountains in front of you or behind you. Everything was gray. Everything was the same color. It was sort of like flying around in a milk bottle.
We didn't think there was any hope at all, especially when nightfall. We knew nightfall was going to be coming in 3 or 4 hours. And we were wondering how long we were going to have to suffer and last through this, because we didn't think there was any chance at all of being picked up or seen by anybody, not out there. So we decided to try to find what was left of the road and try to get back down somehow.
Though in great pain, Roald and Venus stumbled within sight of a bridge where search and rescue personnel were monitoring the river. But the patch of ground they were on had been cut off by the flood.
But one of the fellows was a big guy, a real big, strong guy, and he and his buddy crawled down into the river, into the mud, and walked through it to us. And by the time they got to us, they had lines of mud all the way up to their chins, and they were almost panicking. She's going, we gotta get out of here. The second flow is coming down at 35 to 40 miles an hour, and it'll be here in like 15 minutes. The ground right here where we're at isn't high enough. They estimate it'll get us. The copter got us out. I think the flow came down about 3 or 4 minutes later, and the concrete bridge that the policemen and the DNR fellows were on was just washed away like it was nothing.
Anybody ever seen Dante's Peak?
Yeah.
Remember the scene where he's in the van, he's stuck on the bridge?
Yeah.
In the blast zone, Jess Hagerman and his crew were met with unbelievable scenes
That
of
was a
complete
farce.
destruction.
Those are 100-foot high trees, or more. Yeah, it's probably a big chunk of ice fell in the ash. That's the landslide deposit, 600 feet thick of ash, just debris. Look at that truck. No, that's the
Then,
different one.
amazed that anything could survive the carnage around them, they spotted footprints in the ash.
We made out 2 helicopters, and it looked like they were coming from the direction from where we had left the truck. And we couldn't believe it. I mean, it seemed like a miracle.
We knew they were survivors. We had to somehow get these guys into the helicopter, and where you can't land, that's a problem.
And they tried to land 3 or 4, 5, 6 times. Every time they get near the ground, the ash was blowing up so bad that the helicopters would completely disappear.
By looking right out the door and looking at the ground, just before you impacted the ground, you could see rocks and so forth, then you could cushion and land. When I got down to these 2 people, the one guy, he had big open sores all over his face from burns. I asked him how many are in your group, and he said 4, and there were in fact 2 more footprints going down the road.
Skamaki Skorodov and Diaz were all picked up at 5:30 in the afternoon, 9 hours after the eruption. Within 2 minutes of entering the helicopter, Szymanski and Skorodov lost consciousness. All suffered second and third degree burns, over 45% of their bodies. They were flown to the Oregon Burn Center in Portland. But for Evlanty Sharapov, the story was much different.
We got back to the scene and still looking for the fourth guy. We tried to follow his footprints and he kind of disappeared down towards the valley, and he was found later a month or so down in the valley itself where he had died.
As closely as we can tell, we brought out about 130 people the first day, about 25 the second day, and maybe 15 or 20 the third day. And there were no live rescues after the third day.
That first and second day when we'd go into Kelso to refuel, and every time you'd land, people would run up, just not knowing, and the hope, every time a helicopter come in, that maybe their relatives or friends or whoever would get off the aircraft. Well, it was an emotional thing.
More than 1,000 people had to be evacuated from around the mountain as mud flows and ash fallout continued throughout the day. The alarming scope of the eruption caught emergency services off guard. Escape routes were cut off. Communications were disrupted. Evacuation services overloaded.
But several factors actually reduced the impact. The remoteness of the mountain, the strong westerly winds that carried the ash away from population centers, and the fact that the eruption occurred early on a Sunday morning. Just 24 hours later, and over 1,000 loggers would have been at work in the heart of the blast zone.
At the Oregon Burn Center, relatives of the injured loggers carried on the vigil. On good days, they shared the hope. On bad days, they comforted each other. Much of the time, they merely waited in silence. Within 15 days, both Skorodov and Diaz died of respiratory problems, complicated by their burns. For Szymanski, it was always touch and go.
Doctor, I said, how is he going to be tomorrow or next week? And he looked at me and he said, Helen, he said, we don't talk about next week. He said, we don't talk about tomorrow's. He said, I tell you on a day-to-day basis how Jim is going to be. And that lasted for 30 days.
For the next year and a half, Jim Szymanski, the sole survivor of the 4 loggers, underwent painful reconstructive surgery and grueling rehabilitation. But like many caught in the fury of Mount St. Helens, the scars on his life would take longer to heal.
And you have to have strong faith to be able to make it. And you have to put your pieces back together again. That's the hardest thing, is putting those pieces together and going on with your life.
Following the eruption, the world waited to see and hear about the devastation to Mount St. Helens and the area immediately around Spirit Lake. Michael Lenow was asked to be a part of a film crew that would be among the first to document the devastation from the ground. He excitedly geared up for what he believed would be a short expedition into the blast zone.
I felt like it was worth the risk. It was part of my job as a journalist to go in there and shoot that for the public. We first landed quite a few miles away from the volcano. There were whole forests, as far as we could see, laid flat. Incredible carnage of twisted trees, branches, debris everywhere. And then as we got closer to the mountain, it it just seemed like the whole landscape had been scraped clean with like a bulldozer. And it was very quiet. It was deathly quiet. I was used to being in the forest where you could hear the blowing of the wind through the trees, you could hear birds, you could hear animals, but none of that existed. It was a very eerie, very surreal world that we were walking in. The contours of the land seemed to have changed, and because of the heavy magnetism of the ash, it caused our compass to spin around in circles. And pretty soon, we became very disoriented, and we didn't know what we were going to do.
Without the use of their compass, and with all familiar landmarks obliterated, the film crew was unable to reach the rendezvous point. With only enough food for one day, the crew quickly ran out of energy to combat hypothermia. On the second day, the hikers were spotted by a sheriff's helicopter and told to turn back out of the area. That night, they were forced to burrow into the still warm ash, once deadly, but now necessary for warmth to survive. But the worst was yet to come.
At 2:39 that evening, Mount St. Helens erupted in the second largest eruption. People had heard that blast 200 miles away, and here we are, only a few miles from it, and we didn't hear a thing. We looked up into the sky and saw brilliant flashes of colors like green and orange, pink, and I remember hearing the radio reports of people possibly dying from ash inhalation, and as it became increasingly difficult to breathe, I prayed a simple prayer to God to help me breathe, and pretty soon it started raining. The rain mixed in with the ash, and it came down like wet, hot, sticky cement falling from the sky, and that was a lot better because it cleared up the air and fell all around us.
The new eruption draped the mountain with a heavy fog, inhibiting any search and rescue. On that third day, the National Guard called the families of the film crew to say that they were missing and presumed dead. But for Lino and the other crew members, the ordeal was only half through.
Every hour seemed like an eternity up there. Each step became increasingly more difficult, and we would get stuck in the ash. And as we fell through it, it would burn my feet, my legs, all the way up to my hip. The more that we tried to get out, the more we realized that we were prisoners. Slowly, it was dawning on us that we were becoming our own story.
Your own what?
The hot, cement-like mud melted boots and clung heavily to clothing, draining even more energy from the fatigued crew. Crawling up and over the charred, splintered forest now became a living nightmare. On the evening of the fourth day, they attempted to make camp just a few miles from where they had begun.
Every bone, every muscle in my body was aching, and all I wanted to do was lay down and go to sleep. I remember staring down the fire and just seeing a mental flash of a helicopter, and that startled me. I ran out to the edge of this ravine, and for the first time I saw the Green River 2,000 feet below me, and a few minutes later I saw the little red lights on a helicopter. But they were 2,000 feet below us, looking down, and when I saw them leave, I saw leaving with them all chances of getting out of there that day and maybe ever.
Well, they did get out.
Wow. Wow.
Another helicopter came to rescue them. He
was
was about to say that he saw a tree that was broken and looked in the shape of a cross. And he saw that cross tree, and he saw the blades of the helicopter come over the sign of God, yeah. But this is a science class, so we'll leave the religion to another time. You can believe whatever you want. Okay? I'm not saying you can't believe, of course.
Say again exactly what you want us to write.
Where what?
What do you want us to write about this?
Yeah, so if you have all the events recorded, the days, the dates that each thing happened. He talked about 500 million tons of ash, 5.1 magnitude earthquake, the pyroclastic flows were, whatever, 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Give me that sort of information. Not so much the human side of it, which is interesting.